In Assignment 2, I defined and described my problem and preferences as they relate to my experience of gossip in my professional life. I have a professional and personal value of seeking connection, and gossip has become a skill that I use to create immediate but superficial connection with those I work with. I use gossip when my internal self-talk is negative and I'm experiencing anxiety related to competition, job performance, or experiencing a lack of confidence. Additionally, I reflected that my work culture has the ability to perpetuate individualism and values one's reputation and success over the value of a person separate from their ability. These factors affect how I react in professional conversations and lead to gossip, which has a negative impact on my relationships with colleagues, students, and myself. I identified exceptions to gossiping that include being honest, focusing on the students, and taking time to have vulnerable conversations. These exceptions, although not often in professional relationships, highlighted that my preferred outcome is to have authentic connection, which is based in supporting the students, but also in supporting each other as colleagues. The following is a video that reflects on collaborating on goals and change processes around this problem and preferred outcome. I identified 3 factors that impact my perspective on case conceptualization. The first is continual, holistic, and multi-level assessment for setting goals and facilitating change. Although the problem appears to take place at a micro level, maintaining a holistic and multi-level assessment paints a sociocultural context and allows for a thicker client description of the experience of gossiping. In this specific case, the school culture has an impact on the client's internal self-talk that further impacts their actions to facilitate connection, and it'll be important for me to remain aware of individualism and how that affects the client's view of negative self-talk and their deficit-focused lens. The second factor is constructive collaboration. I have become more aware of the values that I share with the client, including a value of connection. In order to avoid superficial connection, I need to avoid cheerleading and place emphasis on creating goals that pertain to client-centered concerns and avoid trying to fill the role of expert. The final factor is to focus on the client's view of health and healing to facilitate change. Particularly, my client's view of health and healing is that self-confidence and positive self-talk will result in a happier and more fulfilling life. Taking into account this view is important when addressing gossiping and vulnerability as they relate to the client's process of seeking connection. You can see the 3 factors impacting case conceptualization below. You can also see that scaffolding is the technique I would utilize to support collaborative goal setting, because there is evidence in the client's story that they have experience in actions and thoughts that actually support their preferred outcome of authentic connection. They want to have healthy ways to build connection in the workplace, and a lot of these already exist and can be heard of in their exceptions where they actually aren't gossiping. Scaffolding as a technique leads to the development of SMART goals for the counseling process. The first SMART goal will be that the client will interrupt negative self-talk internally at least half of the time in the next 2 weeks. And the second SMART goal is the client will increase their comfort with using vulnerability in work conversations from a 2 out of 10 to a 5 out of 10, with a 10 out of 10 being completely comfortable with being vulnerable. Goal 1, which is working with thoughts and beliefs, has 2 sub-goals. The first sub-goal is that the client will interrupt negative self-talk by simply identifying negative self-talk. The second sub-goal is the client will keep a thought record of influential self-talk, both those that are positive and negative. For goal 2, which is the goal that's working with actions, there are 2 sub-goals. The first sub-goal is the client will use the statement, "The story I am making up right now is," in at least 2 conversations in the next week. And the second sub-goal is the client will incorporate breathing prior to vulnerable conversations to increase awareness around anxiety and to decrease anxiety. I will be looking at using the strategy of gauging the impact of self-talk with the sub-goals associated with Goal 1 around identifying self-talk and keeping a thought record of self-talk. The strategy of gauging the impact of self-talk allows the client to identify explicit and implicit negative self-talk that is typically triggered by anxiety. Focusing on interrupting the self-talk as opposed to stopping and changing the negative self-talk is an achievable sub-goal for the client because it limits the possibility for rumination on failure, because the client's story is very deficit-focused. When the client achieves the sub-goal, the thought record can be utilized to identify alternative thoughts that can replace those identified negative self-thoughts. Gauging the impact of self-talk is an important strategy because the assumption of the problem, or the assumption is that problems develop through automatic thoughts and then become actions or behaviors that influence relationships and connection. In this case, conceptualization, gossip develops from a place of low self-esteem, which is generated generally through negative self-talk, which is perpetuated when gossip persists and acts to influence relationships and the type of connections the client is able to make. The process of change happens through gauging self-talk because it encourages metacognition from the client while still attending to the views of health and healing of the client, that confidence equals healthy, and naming and discerning self-talk through the thought record provides a possibility to the impact of thoughts towards the actions that then connect it to Goal 2. The goodness of fit of this strategy is seen because the client identified that they seek approval and connection, and the gauging self-talk can become a process of empowerment, and through identifying negative self-talk, we work through understanding potential global beliefs that are influencing both problems and preferences for the client. This process of change reduces the chance of the client seeking superficial connection or approval from the counselor by encouraging the growth of self-awareness and increasing self-agency for the client by leading by behind and respecting them as the expert. My question for you is whether or not it's acceptable to work with two different domains of change processes, so thoughts and beliefs and actions, at the same time. And if not, how do I identify which change process should come first? And is there a right or wrong way to doing this?